You don't forget the smell of fresh paint when it's your own walls. I chose the color myself. Drove 40 minutes to the hardware store in Asheville, stood there in the aisle for 20 minutes holding little cardboard squares up to the light. The man working the counter probably thought I was losing my mind. Maybe I was. My husband Bernard had been gone 11 months by then, and I was doing what my grief counselor called reclaiming small decisions. That's what she called it. I called it surviving. The color I picked was called heron gray. Not quite blue, not quite green. Bernard would have hated it. He was a cream and white man, traditional, safe. And maybe that's exactly why I chose it. The cabin sat on 4 acres outside Brevard, North Carolina, up a gravel road that turned into a suggestion of a road in the rain. I'd found the land 2 years before Bernard passed. We'd driven out there on a Sunday afternoon after church. Just the two of us, with a thermos of coffee and no real plan. He'd stood at the edge of the tree line, looking out at the mountain ridge and said, "Maggie, this is the kind of place a person could finally breathe." He never got to build on it. I used his life insurance. I used 30 years of nursing savings. I used every vacation day I hadn't taken in the last 4 years before I retired, because overtime meant extra. And extra meant the cabin could have a real porch with a swing instead of just 2 plastic chairs. That porch mattered to me more than I can explain. Bernard always talked about sitting on a real porch. He'd grown up without one. I wasn't building a vacation home. I was finishing a conversation he and I had started. My daughter Elise was 29 when I broke ground. She came out once during the framing, took a few pictures for her Instagram, said it was "so cute, Mom, so rustic." Her husband Todd walked the property with his hands in his pockets, nodding slowly the way men do when they're calculating something. I didn't think much of it at the time. Todd had that energy about him, always assessing, always adding things up. I assumed he was just that kind of man. I finished the cabin in the spring. I put Bernard's old rocking chair on the porch. Not because it matched anything, because it was his. For the first 2 summers, things were good. Elise and Todd would come up for long weekends, bring my grandkids. Maisie was 6, Owen was 4. We'd hike the trail behind the property, drive into town for barbecue, sit on the porch after the kids were down, and watch the fireflies come up from the meadow. Those were real evenings. I still hold on to them. The shift was so gradual I almost didn't notice it happening. It started with suggestions. Todd mentioned the gravel road was hard on his car. Wondered aloud if I'd thought about paving it. I said I liked the gravel, thank you. He mentioned it again 3 months later. Different phrasing. Then it was the kitchen. Too small for the whole family. Wouldn't it be nice to knock out that wall? Then the sleeping arrangements. 4 people in 2 bedrooms was cramped. Had I considered adding a second bath? Every suggestion was framed as being for my benefit. Every single one. I started to feel like a tenant being quietly informed of the new management. But I told myself I was being unfair. Elise loved that cabin. I could see it in her face when she was there. She relaxed in a way she didn't anywhere else. And I loved having my grandchildren on that mountain. Maisie had learned to catch fireflies there. Owen had his first fishing experience in the creek out back. Those things mattered. So I stayed quiet, and I told myself I was being a difficult old woman, reading too much into a young man's enthusiasm. Then came the summer. He invited his parents. I found out through Elise, who mentioned it the way you mentioned something you're hoping won't be a big deal. Todd's parents are going to come up the first 2 weeks of July, Mom. Just so you know. His dad's having a hard time since his knee surgery, and Todd thought the mountain air would do him good. 2 weeks. I hadn't been asked. I had been informed. I said, "Elise, I was planning to be up there that 2nd week." She said, "Oh, I know, but Todd already told them the dates, and it might be a little crowded. You know how it gets." I know how it gets. In my own cabin, on the land I bought, in the house I built with your father's memory in my own hands. I didn't say that. I said, "All right." And I got off the phone and I sat in my kitchen in Charlotte for a long time looking at nothing. I went up the 3rd week of July instead. Todd's family was gone, but they'd left their mark. a tackle box someone's cousin had left behind, a pair of toddler flip-flops on the porch, a dent in the wood beside the back door. I don't want to think about. The refrigerator was empty. The propane tank was nearly out. Someone had moved Bernard's rocking chair off the porch into the storage shed. I stood in the doorway of that shed for a full minute. I brought the chair back out myself, set it exactly where it belonged, and I sat in it until the sun went down. Then I called my friend Patricia, not Patricia from The Nameless, my actual friend Patricia, who I've known since nursing school in 1987, and I told her what I was feeling. She told me to say something. She said it clearly and more than once. I know, I told her. I will. I didn't. Not then. I'm not proud of that. What I did was start going up more often. I figured presence was a kind of answer. If I was there, the cabin was mine in the most visible way possible. I went up in September, October, twice in November. I raked leaves off the porch roof. I recaulked the bathroom. I replaced the window latch on the back bedroom that had been loose since I built the place. But then Thanksgiving came. Elise called me 3 days before. She said Todd's family had a tradition of spending Thanksgiving at a mountain cabin. Apparently, they'd done it for years before the kids got married, and Todd really wanted to restart it, and she knew this was short notice, but could they use the Brevard cabin this year? I said no. For the first time, I said no clearly and without apology. Silence on the line. Then, Mom, his parents are already expecting it. That isn't my problem, Elise. They weren't invited by me. More silence. Then she said something that I have turned over in my mind every day since. She said, Todd says you're being really selfish about this property. He says you hold it over us like it's some kind of leverage. I held the phone away from my face for a second and looked at it. Todd said I was being selfish. About my own cabin that I had built. I told Elise I would call her back. I did not call her back that day. I drove to my sister Yvonne's house in Concord, and I ate Thanksgiving dinner there, and I was fine mostly, except for when Yvonne's husband said grace and thank God for this family, gathered under this roof, and I started crying and had to go stand in the hallway for a few minutes. After that, things moved faster than I expected. In January, Elise stopped calling as regularly. When she did call, there was a new distance, careful, like she was choosing words. Todd had gotten into her ear in a way I could feel through the phone. He was building a version of me, unreasonable, territorial, selfish, and she was starting to believe it. Then in February, I drove up to the cabin for a long weekend. The key didn't work. I stood on my own porch for 5 minutes trying that key. The same key I'd had cut at the hardware store in Brevard when the cabin was finished. I tried it again, slowly, thinking I was doing something wrong. I was not doing something wrong. The lock had been rekeyed. My hands were not entirely steady when I got back in my car. I sat there in my own driveway, because it was my driveway, and I breathed. I thought about what Patricia had told me months ago. I thought about what Elise had said at Thanksgiving. I thought about Todd standing on my land with his hands in his pockets that very first visit, nodding and calculating. I called the locksmith in Brevard. I explained that I was the property owner, and the locks had been changed without my authorization. He was there within 40 minutes. He rekeyed them back. While he was working, he told me, not unkindly, that I should get something in writing to that effect, in case this happened again. He'd seen it before. I thanked him and didn't say anything else because there wasn't much to say. Inside, the cabin was different. Not dramatically. They hadn't repainted or removed furniture, but there were things. A key hook by the door with 3 sets of keys on it, none of which were mine. A framed photo on the mantel that wasn't my photo. Todd's parents' jackets hanging in the mudroom closet. Bernard's rocking chair was on the porch at least. That was the one thing. I called Elise that evening. I told her, calmly, that I had arrived to find my locks changed, that I'd had a locksmith restore them, and that I needed to understand what had happened. She went quiet for a long moment. Then she said Todd had gotten a new key made because they were planning to come up in March, and she had mentioned once that I didn't always check the cabin in winter, so we thought it would be easier to have their own. I stopped her. I said, Elise, This is my property. I pay the taxes on it. My name is on the deed. Nobody changes the locks on my property without asking me first." She said she understood. Todd apparently did not. 2 weeks later, I got a text from Elise. She'd never texted about the cabin before. It was always calls. The text said that Todd thought it might be best if we worked out a more formal arrangement for who used the cabin and when, because the current setup is causing conflict. He had already spoken to someone, she didn't say who, but I assumed a lawyer or a real estate attorney. The kind of language wasn't accidental, about formalizing shared usage rights. Shared usage rights for a property he had never contributed a single dollar to. I read that text standing in my kitchen in Charlotte at 7:15 on a Wednesday morning, still in my robe, coffee going cold on the counter. I read it 3 times. Then I set the phone down and I called my own attorney. Her name is Sandra Okafor, and she has been practicing family and property law in Charlotte for 22 years. I had her number already because she'd helped me settle Bernard's estate. I called her before I called Elise back. I called her before I called Patricia. Sandra is the person you call when you need to stop feeling and start thinking. She listened. She asked questions. When was the cabin built? Whose name is on the deed? Have I ever allowed any financial contribution from my daughter or son-in-law toward maintenance or mortgage? Has there ever been any written agreement about usage? No, 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 she said. Maggie, you're in a very strong position legally. This property is entirely yours. No court would grant him shared usage rights based on what you've described. Then she said, the thing I needed someone with a law degree to say to me. But the harder question is whether you want to spend the next several years managing a conflict with your daughter about access to a property that now carries a lot of pain for you. I drove up to Brevard that Saturday. I took a long walk on the trail behind the cabin, the same one I used to walk with Maisie and Owen before things got complicated. The leaves were still down, early March, that in-between time when the mountain looks like it's waiting to decide something. I sat on Bernard's rocking chair for a long time. I thought about why I built that cabin. It wasn't for Thanksgiving visits. It wasn't for Todd's parents' knee surgery recovery. It was for breathing. It was for finishing a conversation. And now every time I unlocked the door, I would think about standing in the driveway with a key that didn't fit. I called a realtor on Monday. I want to be clear, I was not running away. I want to say that plainly because I know what some people will think. Some people will say I should have held my ground, changed the locks again, sent a cease and desist, fought it out. Maybe they're right. I've thought about that version too. But here's what I knew. Elise wasn't coming back to herself as long as that cabin existed as a battleground. Todd had made it a symbol of something, of power, of access, of who would claim on what. The moment he'd stood there on my land with his hands in his pockets, he had been deciding. I just hadn't understood the decision he was making. The cabin sold in 6 weeks. March through mid-April. A retired couple from Greensboro bought it. They had grandchildren too. I met them at closing and the wife asked me why I was selling, and I said the mountain had given me what I needed. She nodded, like she understood. I didn't tell Elise the cabin was listed till I had a signed contract. I texted her the day after. I kept it brief. I said I had decided to sell the Brevard property, that closing was in 2 weeks, and that I hoped we could talk soon. She called within the hour. She was crying. She said she hadn't known it would go this far. She said Todd was upset. I told her gently that Todd's feelings about a property he'd never owned weren't something I could take responsibility for. There was a long pause. Then she asked if she could come see me, and I said yes. She came over 2 days later without Todd. We sat at my kitchen table the same way we'd sat there when she was 17 and in trouble and needed to talk without performing for anyone. I made coffee. I let her go first. She said she was sorry. Not for everything, not perfectly, not in a way that resolved everything, but she said it and she meant at least part of it, and that was something. I told her I loved her. I told her that was never the question. The question was always about what we were going to allow to come between us, and I had decided I wasn't going to let a piece of property be the answer to that question. Selling wasn't losing. It was refusing to let something I'd built with love become something I associated with a locked door. She cried again. I did too, a little. After she left, I sat at the table for a while. The proceeds from the sale were in my account. Sandra was helping me update my estate documents, something I should have done years ago. I had already decided I wasn't going to spend that money on another property. Not yet. Maybe not ever. What I did instead was call my friend Patricia, and she called her friend Deanna from church. And Deanna knew a woman named Ruth from her old neighborhood who'd gone through something similar. Not a cabin, but a beach house. Same story, different coast. The four of us started meeting for dinner on the first Thursday of every month at a restaurant in Noda, the arts district in Charlotte. Sometimes we're 5, sometimes 6. Last month we were 8. I don't know what you'd call it officially. We haven't named it, but it's the thing I look forward to most every month. More than my book club, more than my Tuesday morning walks, more than most things I can name. Women who have lived long enough to know what it costs to build something and what it means to choose yourself when the two things come into conflict. I brought Bernard's rocking chair to my back porch in Charlotte. It looks different there, against the fence, between my potted rosemary and the old bird bath I never got around to replacing. But when I sit in it in the early evening when the light comes through the neighbor's oak tree at a certain angle, I still feel like I'm finishing something. Not a conversation, exactly. More like a decision. I think Bernard would understand. I've had a lot of time to sit with what happened, not to replay it, I'm past that, but to really understand what it was trying to show me. The cabin didn't disappear because of Todd. I want to say that clearly because it would be easy to make him the whole story. But the truth is more uncomfortable than that. What happened to me was the result of 100 small moments where I said, all right, when I should have said no. Every time I swallowed my discomfort to keep the peace, I made space for something I didn't intend to invite in. That's not self-blame. That's just cause and effect, plainly observed. The longer we stay quiet about what belongs to us, our time, our property, our place at our own table, the more we teach people that our silence means consent. Todd didn't wake up one morning and decide to take my cabin. He walked through every door I left open, and I left a lot of doors open because I thought that was what love required. It doesn't. Love requires honesty, even when honesty is uncomfortable, especially then. What I learned about intelligence, real intelligence, the kind that comes from living and not just from reading, is that it means being able to see a pattern before it completes itself. I saw the pattern with Todd. I felt it that first afternoon when he stood on my land calculating. My gut knew, but I overrode what I knew with what I wanted to believe, which was that my daughter had chosen well and that everything would work out, because I was reasonable and patient and kind. Patience and kindness are not the same thing as wisdom. Wisdom would have been saying early and firmly, this is mine and here is how it works. I earned that right. I didn't need to apologize for it. Strength, the kind that actually holds, is quiet. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't need an audience. When I called Sandra and then called the realtor and then sat at my kitchen table and told Elise what I had decided, I wasn't performing anything for anyone. I was just done negotiating my own worth. That's what real resolve feels like. Not loud, not angry, just done. The thing I'm most grateful for, and I didn't expect to say this, is the women I found on the other side of all of it. Patricia, Deanna, and the ones who came after. Women who understood without needing the full story, because they'd lived versions of it themselves. There is something profoundly clarifying about sitting across from a person who gets it. It reminds you that you are never as alone as you felt. I still have Bernard's rocking chair. I still sit in it when the light comes through the neighbor's oak at a certain angle. The cabin is gone, but the conversation Bernard and I started on that Sunday afternoon with a thermos of coffee, I don't think that ever really ended. I just moved where I'm finishing it. If you're somewhere in the middle of your own version of this, watching something you built get slowly claimed by someone who didn't earn it. I'll say what I wish someone had said to me sooner. You are allowed to protect what is yours. That is not selfishness. That is self-respect. And self-respect, once you finally choose it, turns out to be the foundation everything else was always supposed to be built on.